All right, shall we begin? You can all hear me okay? Perfect. I'm going to start this by saying a small caveat that there's only one thing that features Perl in this talk, but it's continuing my tradition of giving a talk at a Perl conference that is not Perl. It's like something interesting, right? I thought I'd start by just playing a little game. There won't be any sound here, but it doesn't matter. Does anybody recognize this? Yep, 1, 2. So I'm just going to input my my name here. Okay, let's begin. So this is A Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. I must go. TPRC 2023 needs me. So one of the big things in this game is you open these little chests to get items. So this one just has some money in there. And what we're going to go and try rescue Princess Zelda. She's hidden in the castle. So we go up here, can pick things up, and we can read signs. I'll do that in a bit. Don't need to do that yet. One of the things you learn quite quickly in this game is you can pick things up and there might be things hidden underneath them. It kind of trolls you a little bit. So you spend the entire game picking every single bush and every single rock up. So for example, this one is a secret passage into the castle where we find our uncle who's not in the best state, but he gives us a weapon to carry on. So we're going to keep going and let's get rid of these guards. Whoop. Banged into us. And what do we think is going to be in this chest?
Pearl.
It's Pearl. There's Pearl. All right, I'll stop.
Too obvious.
Yeah, too obvious, yeah. But that's not in the vanilla game. In the vanilla game, I think that is a lamp. So I'll quit that and I'll move to my slides. Put this down. The technology worked, which is good. All right, yeah, so what Zelda taught me about non-deterministic polynomial time complexity. I was trying to go for the longest possible title in the conference. I think I managed. Yeah, so this is A Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, which is a game for the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom, I think, on this side of the pond. It was first released in late 91. I played this when I was a kid in 93. It came out in late 92, I think, in Europe. So that was 30 years ago. And it took me most of a summer to complete the game, because I said it trolls you quite good. You know, you have to pick up every bush and rock, and it's like, so what do you need to do to complete it? Well, as you saw, we were kind of storming the castle there. We're trying to rescue Princess Zelda, and then we collect 3 pendants. I forget. One's a pendant of courage, wisdom, and something else. I forget exactly. And that allows us to get the Master Sword, which we will use to defeat Aga. Link likes to hold things up in the air. This is a recurring theme of the Zelda games. And then we get transported into the Dark World. We think we've completed the game at that point, but it's trolling us again. So suddenly we're in the Dark World and we realize we've only completed a quarter of the game. And then in the Dark World, we collect 7 crystals that allows us to free 7 maidens. And that then breaks the seal on Ganon's tower so we can defeat Ganon and save Hyrule. So that's the end screen in the game. Sorry, spoiler. Simple, right? It's a relatively linear game. So as you saw, we got items out of chests. You get them from other locations. And the progression items are the same location every time you play the game. It's entirely deterministic. It's relatively linear. And it opens up by you collecting those items. So you can't access this part of the world until you have the flippers or the hammer or the bow or whatever. So the vanilla game has a set route to complete it. And as I said, it's the same every time you play it. You can kind of play it a little bit out of order, so you can complete one dungeon before the other, but it's relatively linear because of the items and where they're placed. There are some randomized aspects, so the enemy behavior and some of the non-progressive items are randomized. And because it's a relatively linear game, people started speedrunning it. So speedrunning is where you try and complete the game as quickly as possible. And over the years, the time to complete the game has fallen to about 1 hour and 20 minutes. Yes. Bear in mind, it took me an entire summer to complete the game, and people can now do it in an hour and less than an hour and a half. The thing is, I don't really find that very interesting because it's essentially a grind. You know, you just keep playing it and playing it and playing it and playing it, and you reset when you make a mistake, and it's not very interesting to watch or do. NMG here means no major glitches, because the game has lots of bugs in it. You can exploit those bugs to complete the game even quicker. So there's a certain set of things you're not allowed to do if you're going for certain types of records. AGDQ is actually a charity event. So they every year, maybe several times a year now, lots of people come and complete games really quickly, and they raise millions and millions for charity. It's a fantastic event. I think they do one in the summer, one in the winter. They do an online one. There's loads of them. And they live stream these and they upload them to YouTube. And that was my first encounter with the randomizer. I occasionally watch some of these speedrunning games on YouTube. It's more kind of out of not quite morbid curiosity. So it's like, I think I saw Final Fantasy VII completed in 7 hours or something ridiculous, because literally the unskippable content is more than 7 hours. So it's like, how did they do that? So, and then of course the algorithm started throwing other speedruns at me, and that's where I discovered the randomizer. So what is the randomizer? It's a patched version of A Link to the Past where all the items are shuffled. So in the original game, there's 216 items, about 25 of them, I think, grant progression. So those are the ones we're interested in. And if you shuffle the items, it changes the possible route through the game. So you effectively get infinite variations. And the randomizer itself understands the logic of the game. So it prevents hard locks. You know, putting an item in a place where you would need the item to access that item would obviously not make sense. So it has all of this logic built into the code to prevent that. And it allows different modes of randomization. So it's been around now for several years. So they're not just randomizing where items go, but also what things you have to do and what enemies there are and where the bosses are, and etc., etc. So a patched version of the game might end up with not having to storm the castle to rescue Zelda, not having to collect 3 pendants, getting the Master Sword but not having to defeat Aga, getting transported into the Dark World is kind of a requirement, maybe having to rescue 7 maidens, and then climbing the tower to defeat Ganon and saving Hyrule. So the game is now far less linear. And what's also interesting here is, because you don't have to complete all the requirements, you might complete those requirements and not realize that you had to not complete those requirements. So people started speedrunning the randomizer, and it becomes interesting because you're trying to figure out the quickest way to complete something that you don't know how to yet complete it. So just on the technicalities behind the randomizer itself, it was originally written in C# and it's been PHP since 2016. I'm saying 2016, that's the initial commit, so it probably predates that. It's currently on version 31 with 32 in preview. And what it has is essentially, it knows the address space of every item in the game. And like I said, the logical requirements to access those items in the game. And as I said, at first it was simply randomizing items, but now it's doing all sorts of things. So to give an example from the game, this is Checkerboard Cave, which is, it's one of the late locations in the game, and you need a lot of items to get to this. So in the vanilla game, this just contains a heart piece. It's not something you need to complete the game, but to be able to get to this location, you need, I think, 4 or 5 progression items. Now, in the randomizer, the item in there could be almost anything. And you might get those progression items very, very quickly. On the coding side of things, this is how it looks. So you can see here, we essentially have the address in the ROM of that location. And we have a location collection where we're returning information about that location. And we also have the logic around how we get to that location. So as we can see here, there are some definitive requirements. We have to be able to lift that rock. That green colored thing is a rock which opens up to reveal a cave. So we need to be able to lift rocks, but then we also need to be able to get to it. And that is factored into having the magic mirror and also being able to access the region where that location is. And that region itself will then have a set of checks about other items to be able to get there. This is the very last location in the game. So as you can see, it has quite a few checks and those are factored into their own checks. So this is right at the top of Ganon's tower, the very final item, and you need almost every progression item in the game to get there. So yeah, the attraction of the randomizer is every new seed, every new game we generate is different. We have about 20 items to beat the game and 216 possible locations they can be. We know how to get to those locations, but we want to do it in the optimal order. And sometimes we have interesting routing or logic problems. And this is a classical known problem in combinatorial maths / computer science, right? It's traveling salesman, or the traveling link in this case, which is an NP hard routing problem. It's not an NP complete problem. But here it's actually more complex than that because certain areas only become accessible after getting other items. And we don't know where those other items are. So we're adding known unknowns to an NP hard problem. And the route evolves as those items are accessed, including dead ends and backtracking. As I said, you might go into a location that has nothing in there and doesn't grant you any more progression. So how does the randomizer actually create this route? It's down to the person playing it to solve it. It's quite an interesting algorithm. It's quite simple when you think about it. It basically shuffles all of the locations and then goes through each one, putting an item into the location, checking if it's able to put that item into the location, given all the other locations of the other items in the game. So it's quite a simple algorithm. And as you saw from the previous code, every location knows the prerequisites to be able to get to it. Solving the route, well, yeah, that's the fun. You never know what you're going to get. So what I'm going to try and do here is try and generate another seed with debug enabled so we can see that algorithm working. I think I've got this one up in here. Yep, so let's see if this works. Oops. So I'm telling the log, and I think in my history I've got. So what I'm doing here, so this is how I cheated. I forced the moon pearl into the secret passage. That's not actually in the randomizer. I patched it to allow me to do that. So if we generate a game, we get the debug, and as we can see here, we've got, if I go back to the top, the first thing it does is it defines which dungeons we need to complete, and then it starts putting all of the junk items, the non-progression items, into places. And then it starts putting the key items, the progression items, into other locations. So here the hammer is hard required to complete the game. We got a bow, we got a fire rod, we got an ice rod. These are all progression items. And that's generated a seed. What I can do then is if I find that seed, I can drag it into my emulator. If my dragging pad is going to work. No, it's not working. There we go. So upside down and back to front thing. So it's that one there. So if I start that and my controller is still working, it's still working. I'm just going to do this. And what you'll notice here is this one is a bit different to the previous one in that the world state is completely different. So I can choose where to start. So I'm going to start at the sanctuary rather than Link's house. And I don't know what's going to be in this chest. Normally it's, I think, a heart piece. And here, it's a heart piece. And there's so many of those in the game, they can inevitably end up being in their vanilla locations. Right, so I'll quit that. And yeah, there's a huge community built around this thing. As I said, it's been around. It's almost 10 years it's been around. This is me in Discord, in one of several Discord servers. I mean, there's several thousand users online at any one time. There's practice ROMs, so you can practice your strats and strategies. There's trackers, because when you're playing the game, you want to keep track of what you've got and where you've been. So people have built tools around that. There's a platform that's been built to have races with other players. And that's led to tournaments. So just last weekend, it was the final of the main tournament, which had, I think, 500 people registered, and then it was down to 256. And over a period of 3 months, got down to the final, which was last weekend. Podcasts and mentor races. There's over 125 podcasts now. They have a bi-weekly podcast. Development communities. So the code is all on GitHub, so you can look at it and run it, patch it. Streamers, loads of people streaming to Twitch. I have my own Twitch. I don't do it much. I play it maybe once or twice a month, and I just stream it because it's kind of interesting to do that, learning how to stream and all that kind of thing. So yeah, what did it teach me about non-deterministic polynomial time complexity? It's fun and an enjoyable way to waste a lot of time. Any questions? No questions? Yep.
Do you know if there is a randomizer for Metroid?
So you're going to like this. Is there a randomizer for Super Metroid? Yes. The original Metroid. There probably is, but there's also a randomizer for Super Metroid. And because of some fluke in the way that the ROMs are, A Legend of Zelda and A Link to the Past, A Legend of Zelda and Super Metroid, you can combine the two games, and the items from one game can be found in the items to another game. It's absolutely nuts. So yes, and there's randomizers for lots of other games. A lot, even recent games. So there's randomizers for not the latest Zelda game, but the Breath of the Wild. So there's now randomizers for Breath of the Wild. So yeah, there are other randomizers. Question?
Is there any conceivable practical application for any of this?
Is there any conceivable practical application for any of this? Yes. People have got involved in coding that weren't interested in coding. That's a pretty good practical application for this. Oh, fun, exactly.
If you are talking about practical applications, I can immediately see one for generating tests for that sort of approach. If you have a data set that is large and complex enough that randomizing the actual tests you're generating would make sense to give you the kind of coverage you need in a reasonable time frame.
So yeah, the suggestion where there is a practical application is tests, basically. Other question? Yeah.
Are there also instances where people are reading code to control Link going around the maze and trying to do that?
Are people writing code to play the game, essentially? Yeah, I mean, there has been that technology for at least 10 years where you can have the computer play the game, and it can do things that it can do inputs that humans aren't capable of doing, so it can break the game in other ways.
Yeah, I guess like trying to have the computer come up with the optimal way around it.
So can the computer make the optimal route?
And the thing is, like, even though the Tropical realm is NPR, it's in general, like, there's lots of special cases where there are provable algorithms where it might only be big old n squared.
Mm-hmm.
You know that it's going to be Euclidean distances.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea if Zelda actually follows that or not.
Yeah, so the question is kind of around solving making the optimal route given the class of NP problem. And there's,
I mean, that's an interesting.
yeah, that's an interesting thing. Yeah, it is an interest, and this is probably its own example of the problem, because, as I said, the route, you don't know where you're going to go. Traveling salesman, you generally know where you want to go. It's just how do you get there quick enough. But here it's, I go there and all of a sudden I need to go here, but I went here and it was a waste of time. So it's an interesting problem.
David Chapman wrote a book on that. You can find it on Amazon. It's fairly expensive, but it's where he wrote a dungeon crawler AI, and it was while he was doing AI research to try to figure out whether he could solve the frame problem. In that limited context, yes, you can.
So David Chapman wrote a book on this, and he, in the process of writing that book, he found the solution to another problem, essentially. So, any more questions? Yep.
Just wondering if these slides are published somewhere. So we can get the links.
Are the slides available? Yes, they are available. They're on lejo.github.io. lejo.github.io, and there's a code link at the top, and the presentation is already here. And all of this is open source, and you can, it's relatively trivial to get the random. There is actually a website that will generate games for you. You don't have to download the code and install PHP and Artisan and Cat and all, not Cat and Composer and all that stuff. It's easy to do online. I think we're out of time, so thank you very much.